A common question is, how do I know my peep height? Because there's certainly times where you get a bow and this thing feels like it fits like a glove, and every time you draw back and find that anchor, it seems like that peep sight's right there. Well, I'm here to tell you that once you find that sweet spot, or if you have a bow that has that sweet spot, then here's what you need to do in order to know that measurement. What you have to do is you need to take that bow and draw it back, and then you need to measure, or have someone measure for you, the distance between the center of this peep sight to the center of that arrow shaft. This has to be done at full draw. Because if you think about it, our face remains the same. And honestly, it's pretty common for that number to be, honestly, anywhere between 3.5 and 4 inches. Mine is just under 4 inches, if that helps you. But really what we're looking for is, where is the position of the arrow on the face, which I want it between the lip and the chin. I want it in this safe zone of the face, the cradle of the face. And our eye isn't moving up and down on our skull. So when the anchor is in a position with a handheld release, that arrow is going to be between the index finger and the middle finger. So where that anchor is going to determine where that arrow shaft is, and then that distance to your eye is going to be the same. The reason these numbers vary is because depending on the axle to axle length of your bow, or the brace height, or how far you're pulling back this triangle with those other two factors in, that will determine the angle of the string. And the sharper the angle, or the sharper that triangle, then the higher that peep will have to be when the bow's at rest. If it's a real long axle to axle bow with a long brace height, and when you draw it back it hardly bends at all, and that triangle is pretty wide open, that peep isn't really moving down very much on that plane. So in that case, a lot of times the peep is lower at rest. So if you have bows that have very consistent brace height measurements and axle to axle lengths and cam size, because depending on where the string is leaving these cams and how far that spacing is from the axle, because look at this cam's oblong this way, so as it rolls around, that string will be coming off a higher point than that axle to axle length. So depending on all of those factors, that will determine where your peep is when it's at rest. And sometimes the rest is different than what it is from one bow to the next. But if you know it at full draw, it will always be consistent. So I'm going to draw this back right now, and I'll hold, and I want you to think about that. My anchor position, where my arrow is safe on my face, and then taking that measurement from the center of that arrow shaft to the center of that peep height. If you know that, then every time you get a brand new bow, before you even put the peep in there, you can draw it back and have someone measure vertically up the string, and they can put a little mark where you think that peep needs to go. Otherwise, you can put it in an approximation, draw it back either in a machine, or draw it back and have someone take that measurement for you. Really easy. So you can see right there, the center of my peep is right over the front edge of my vane. And when I'm anchored in the right spot, that distance from my anchor position and where the arrow is on my face, going straight up to the peep, that's always going to be the same. And here's the one last thing I'll tell you about peep placement, is depending on the distances that you're shooting, that peep may feel more comfortable in a certain spot. If you're shooting 20 yards all the time for indoor season, I'm always shooting 18 meters, about 20 yards. So my sight is always at the top of that my sight rail. It's always all the way up like that. So my peep is pretty comfortable slightly higher when I'm only shooting that short distance. But once I start to shoot a further distance, and now this sight is way down there, I would feel like I'm floating with my anchor point trying to look down through that peep that way. So in those times where I'm shooting longer distances more often, I might fudge that peep slightly lower so that I'm still tight on my anchor and the tip of my nose is on my string, and then I'm able to have my sight sighted in. Most of the time I tell people, take your average distance that you're practicing and find a peep height that's super comfortable at those distances. For example, at tack ranges, the ranges average over 50 yards. So if they're in the upper 50s or 60 yards, I want a peep that's super comfortable at that distance. Where again, if I'm shooting the winter indoor leagues at 18 meters, my peep really is at a position where when my sight is all the way at the top of that rail, that is where it's most comfortable. So let's see here. I'm gonna go dead center. All right, that is right at 45 yards. So now I'm gonna move down. I'm gonna do one a little bit longer. And because I've set this peep to where it's most comfortable for me at 55 yards, when I go all the way down to the far elk, it's still comfortable for me. And my peep at rest is right at about, from the top of the nock to the center of the peep is right at 6 inches. And if my bow is at full draw, it's right at about 3.9. Beauteous.